I've got to say, actually. So let's do a pronoun round and then start the debate. This is also a good chance to make sure your mic is working. My name is Tom. I'm your chair for this debate. My pronouns are he or they, please. My panelist.
I'm Hung and I'm a he, so I'm from Vietnam. Nice to chat you guys.
Cool. OG.
Prime Minister Bolo, no preference. My teammate needs a second to go back to the page. He got. All right, thank you.
Can we go to Olo then?
Wee-Ern, he deputy.
Elo, could you just do your pronouns?
He.
CG.
Hello, my name is Sweeney. My preferred pronouns are he or they.
Hi, I'm Ellie, she or they.
I'm Inso, she, her.
Joseph, I prefer he or they.
Okay, is DPM back yet?
Not yet. I'll check up on him.
Oh, yeah, we'll give him another 30 seconds or so, and then otherwise we're going to start the debate.
Sorry about that. Okay, he said he's here, but his mic is disabled.
I think it's working now. Yep, we can hear you. Just a pronoun introduction, and we can start the debate. That's right.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, Josh, just a quick pronoun introduction, then we can start the debate, mate.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, sorry, Josh, no pronoun preferences. Really sorry for the inconvenience. Let's have fun.
Well, good. I welcome the PM to start this debate. Here.
All right, just Josh, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me? Just double checking.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Chair and panel. Human labor is going to be replaced by artificial intelligence in volumes. We are talking about truckers in the United States of America that will be replaced by self-driving trucks. Amazon and Jeff Bezos is going to implement this in half a decade. The future is here. The future is now. It's just not proportionally given to the people in terms of the benefit. We think retailers, salespeople, proofreaders, telemarketers, and even accountants and lawyers will be replaced by artificial intelligence. What does this mean? The underprivileged is fucked. The reason why they're fucked is because they will lose their jobs and there's loss of income. We believe that the main problem is private corporations, when they have so much wealth and they develop AI, they are uncharitable. They are profit-driven and are likely to just fire these workers without or little benefit. I'm going to go on to my model, but before that, I'll take on a clarification from...
It's not clarification, it's a point. Are you okay with that?
Point
taken.
On both sides of the house, the AI development is something that's inevitable. This debate is not about saving jobs. On both sides, there will be transition phases anyway. You need to uniquely tell us why state is the best actor compared to the free market and corporations who are able to do things on a high efficiency and develop AI in a better manner.
Okay, you just wasted the point because that's the entire debate. We're talking about that corporations are profit driven and they're likely to fire workers and just leave them in the dump. Now, let me talk about the model to better address that POI. The first level of our model is we want to transfer funds from the military, like maybe like part of the $652 billion that is spent on the military to buy these types of AI development and usage and companies. We're also talking about buying them or even getting majority of the shares, like 51% equity, such that the government has control of these types of corporation and AI development. All these types of, we're only taking all the development of human labor that, and any of them can be a
Can't hear. 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 Can't hear.
Start.
Can't hear. Can't hear.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can.
All right, sorry, where did I end? Did I end with my model? My apologies.
2 minutes 40.
Yeah, Bolo,
So-
you didn't finish the model. You just said that we would buy the companies, have majority ownership, and then there's more to the model you're about to explain.
Got it. So I have how many minutes left? Four minutes and 30 seconds left. All right. Okay. All right. I'll just be totally transparent of like when that ends. All right. I'll start. Yeah. Go signal. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Here.
Hello. All right. The second part of our model. So we're gonna buy them. We're gonna control them. We're gonna buy 51% of equity or more. The second part of their model, the money that we get from the investments in the future from getting and owning AI development and usage, we will give it to the people in two ways, either welfare programs or basic income that will provide them means of doing so. I have three arguments that I want to talk about in my speech. First argument is I'm going to talk about why this is highly feasible. Secondly, I'm going to be talking about why private actors are bad actors in terms of the usage of AI, in terms of replacing labor. But lastly, I'm going to talk about why it disproportionately affects the lower income people in many ways. Let's go on to why it's feasible. Because there are three reasons. Number one, government has a lot of money to spend. Second reason is that there's high profit in the future since AI is inevitable. But three, we think that AI development is relatively cheaper now rather than not owning it in the future or trying to own it in the future at the end of the day. So some of the examples is that when we see in the stock market, it goes up and up in terms of their profit value at the end. We think that more technology means more development and more profit for the state once the state gets to own this. We think we have all the money. We think the returns are inevitable. No, thank you. Let's go on to the second important argument. Why private actors are bad actors to own these types of AI development. Three reasons, three structural reasons. Number one is that the profit incentive of private corporations. They only have certain accountabilities to themselves, to their holders, and to the technocrats in the company, such as their executives. Secondly, we say that it is cheaper for private companies to just fire workers with little warning. Thirdly, private companies are so cutthroat. Two main examples in case studies that I want to flag down is the example of United Airlines. United Airlines got a bailout from the United States of America's government, but they still fired their workers rather than retaining their workers or giving them those types of benefits. Let's take a look at the second case study in terms of McDonald's in the United States of America. They replaced their human workers for electronic workers at the end of the day, and they didn't even give them benefits that would last them long at the end. Which leads me to my last argument, why it disproportionately affects low-income workers. Two structural reasons. No, thank you. Oh, stop badgering me. First is that people have no alternatives at the end of the day. But secondly, because there is lack of education and lack of education funding, people can't find other alternatives of jobs like coding or software development or programming. But even if you don't buy that argument, we think that labor still takes majority of people's income at the end of the day. And we think that people in the United States of America and even the whole world are unable to feed themselves once they are already replaced. They're going to go down to the poverty line. Many people will be going to die. Sorry, the 6 minute. Many people are going to die because they don't have money, or even if like they have little money, they wouldn't even be able to spend for their healthcare at the end of the day. That's why we'd like to have more income for the state, and that investment we think is not only necessary but also strategic in terms of where the world is going. In my last 30 seconds, I want to talk about a comparative. Absent the ownership of the state, what will happen in opposition side is that these types of people in corporations will keep amassing wealth, and those people will be losing their job at the end of the day. At least in our paradigm, even if it's likelier for people to lose their job, the government will be taking care of them because the government has the main responsibility to take care of their people. They are directly accountable to their people and the most vulnerable, in comparison to opposition, where they're only directly accountable to themselves, the holders, and the executives of that company. The comparative is really clear. Vote for opening government. Thank you.
I'd like to thank PM for that speech and welcome LO to start the op case. Here.
Here.
Okay.
Start.
Mr. Speaker, this debate can only happen at a point at which we all recognize that AI development is inevitable, that every country in the world needs to change, that every country needs to develop to remain competitive in the global market in order to continue to grow their GDP and therefore sustain the best form of income and welfare for people on the ground. That inevitability in and of itself is the reason why OO takes this debate, because we will show you how exactly nationalization is going to cripple research and development, hurting the very vulnerable people that OG wanted to talk about, right? We need to recognize that the AI benefits are bountiful, that we think that we are able to help all sorts of people on the ground. That's what we stand for. But we are also going to show why exactly the state is a terrible actor that's going to hurt the most vulnerable, right? So I'll do a few things in my speech. Number one, rebuttals. So the vast majority of the case was hinged on one point. That is to say that human labor will be replaced, individuals will lose their jobs. Now, I think there are three ways in which I'm going to break this down. Number one, I think that the nature of the job market is going to change, but that doesn't necessarily means that there is a net less jobs in the market, right? What do we think this kind of world is going to look like? Number one, we believe that we will move to more service-intensive industry. That's to say that now we will have a greater hiring of machine operators, individuals who will be servicing the sorts of AI that we have under our side of the house. The importance of this is that we do not think that just because we
Point.
transition into AI, that means that there's going to be far less jobs. We just believe that the nature of the job is going to change. What we think is in fact going to happen is that we see the complete upward mobility of the entire society. That's to say that individuals who already have that higher education have to fill in roles that are even more like resource intensive whatsoever, and we see that we believe that we will also have things like training programs that corporations are incentivized to do because they recognize that AI is able to yield many benefits, right? What are examples of this? For example, we believe that in the past, things like the agricultural revolution, from which we transition from a forager lifestyle, or the transition to the industrial revolution, every single time these sorts of transitions have happened, there has been fear and paranoia, right? But what has always resulted as a result of these transitions is a better world, a better economy, where more people are lifted out of poverty, where there's more development of infrastructure and those sorts of things. That's what we stand for. It comes from recognizing that this change is inevitable when nationalization is not the way to go forward with this, right? Two arguments I have in my speech. Number one, why artificial intelligence is intrinsically important and yields an overarching benefit for the economy. The second argument is why states are horrible actors and nationalization cripples R&D. On the first, why is AI intrinsically important and yields overarching benefits for your economy? The first thing to note is that artificial intelligence is the exclusive way by which we're able to improve our material benefits for individuals on the ground. There are two ways in which this happens. Number one, quantity of goods and accessibility of these goods to individuals like the poor that they wanted to talk about. We believe that through the use of things like automation that uniquely happens at a point at which you invest in the R&D of AI, we get things like being able to more effectively use economies of scale. It looks like being able to have the mass production of insulin that happens when we have robots that are able to like input the different chemicals that are needed, right? It might be even something as mundane as the airline industry, right? How now like airline like Emirates Airline is able to increase its capacity and maximize how many seats it can give to people based on like the way in which you use automation to deal with food and beverages. Secondly, it's also the quality of goods, right? Because understand that the research and development is extremely resource intensive, and you're only able to use AI in order to improve your goods at a point at which you use that, right? But secondly, we think larger impact, right? Not just on individual consumers, AI serves as an economic engine. We believe that the point at which you have a developed economy with artificial intelligence is when you can remain competitive in the market. Where currently China is going to be like developing at such a quick rate, where other countries like South Korea are using artificial intelligence. In order to remain competitive, you need to make this transition where now AI is the main provider for your GDP. We think that we would like link that and like draw the parallel to things like oil, right? Where countries like Brunei and Qatar are able to have such great welfare and provision of services for its citizens, right? We believe that AI is the exclusive is just akin to oil in those respects. But before my second argument, yeah.
Point
taken.
Why would employers now pay employees more, considering you can now sack all those employees because you don't need them anymore? Do you think that manufacturing workers in Michigan who have been replaced by robot arms have had a higher standard of living since the imposition of that technology?
Oh, I literally just explained in my response to the rebuttal why exactly these individuals will still be needed. That's to say that even though they won't be working the same sorts of jobs, the nature of the job market changes, and there will still be a need for these individuals because there will be a huge like increase of jobs in which is like needed in order for the development of AI, right? Okay, second argument, why nationalization cripples R&D. Understand that R&D is most important to AI development. That means that trying to test out its efficiency and efficacy. It also looks like testing and experimentation. Why exactly does this not happen under their side of the house? Something they have to exclusively deal with at the point at which they want to use the state as an actor. The reliance on political will necessarily means that you cripple that sort of research. Number one, it is extremely resource intensive in order for you to develop these sorts of things, right? that means that governments are less likely to want to invest in them where they could go to cheaper alternatives like providing welfare. Number two, it's heavily hit or miss, right? So you have a very low rate of success with respects to whether or not your AI development is going to be one that is successful. Number three, it's also the fact that these sorts of investment are extremely expensive and take very long time in order to yield results. If I am a government, I'm probably not going to invest in something that takes me 20 years in order to see benefits, because my successor can just claim benefit of that and take the credit. Number four, right? It means governments need to prioritize masses which do not see the direct benefits of AI. So that means maybe giving cash subsidies. It means helping factory workers. Those sorts of things means that the reliance on political will cripples your ability to develop. Why are corporations then far better? We think that many corporations, Apple, Microsoft, and all these sorts of corporations have business models which allow them to sacrifice the short term to take the brunt of the cost in this instance in order to invest for the future, right? It's for the very reason which they say that these corporations are profit incentivized that we think they are the best actor. We stand with the vulnerable. We stand for a greater economy. We're very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank Elo for that speech and welcome DPM. Here.
Awesome. Are you guys able to hear me okay?
Yep.
Here.
Start. OO is unfortunately out of this debate when they predicate all of their benefits on the fact that the government can't conduct R&D. I think simply examining NASA or the fact that the government was the one who created GPS technologies, the government was the one who originally created internet technologies, is a stunning example of why OO is going to be out of this debate. But of course, I'll dive in more detail. So first of all, they tell us that human labor is not going to be replaced. The job market's going to change. We're going to move to more service-intensive industry with like machine repairists, right? They knife themselves when the LO literally says this is for people who already have higher education, which means they explicitly acknowledge that lower income people who've been blocked from higher education because of the rising cost of tuition will be barred from these jobs. So LO's given us the first reason why they won't have access to these jobs. But secondly, even if like technically they did have access to these jobs, we think that the constant inflation of higher education, where now everyone has a bachelor's and now everyone is expected to get a master's in order to be able to stand out, means that lower income people who have finite resources can't compete within this higher education market, which means they'll always get beat out by middle and upper class people for these types of jobs anyways. But in general, we also think that LO is just not predictive of the future. We think that like in general, more and more people's jobs are going to be taken over by this because Bolo has given you the profit incentives of why corporations are likely to sack you as soon as they have a profit incentive in order to be able to do so, which means that in the future, when technologies can replace even more and more types of jobs, everyone's at risk. It's better for the government to take control of these companies now, and the government is a much better actor in order to roll out these types of policies, and the money that we get from these types of from these types of companies allows us to support basic income and things that will not only support low-income workers, but will support everyone in the long term, right? Secondly, they say, corporations will do training programs, right? I think that they haven't given us an incentive why corporations would do training programs. There's plenty of middle and upper class people to take these jobs, so they don't need to do it. There's no profit incentive for them to do training programs. However, even if they were forced to, or even if they tried to do it for some like optics measure to look like good companies, right? There's no incentive for them to do it in a timely manner. Because again, even if they're creating all these machinist jobs, there's plenty of middle class and upper class people with engineering degrees to be able to take these jobs. They're not incentivized to do it in a timely manner. And during that period where the workers don't have training and have lost their jobs, they will starve, they will die, they can't pay for their families, they can't pay for their healthcare. This is particularly important in times of crisis, like right now with what we see with COVID and with global warming, with like higher, warmer areas, more mosquito-borne illness as a result. Urbanization means more animal and human interaction. We're likely to see more and more pandemics, more and more times of crisis. So it's even more important that people are able to retain their jobs or be skilled enough to replace jobs once the crisis comes out of it. But last and not least, like they just have a profit incentive. So I don't think that these training programs would particularly be high quality because again, they have the profit incentive to cut costs, not put a lot of money into the programs. This is a ridiculous response. Why do we think the government is as good as and actually a better actor than corporations? The first is that they are plenty able to do R&D, right? We think that R&D, they said, but R&D is research intensive. It's hit or miss. I think that the governments, when they take control of these companies, have all the resources of these private companies, right? Like the skill of the researchers that were at these private companies, the government now appropriates, so we get that benefit on our side. They're equally able to do this hard, intensive research. Secondly, governments have enormous budgets, and so if it requires more money, they can put more money into it. Why are they willing to do that? Because even if it requires cost cutting outside of the military, people having jobs first is a prerequisite to be able to access any other benefits. It doesn't matter if you have access to healthcare if you can't afford to feed your family. It doesn't matter if there's like government subsidized public transportation if you don't have a job because you have no job to commute to. So the government ensuring that people, especially lower income people with no safety or security nets, have jobs is the most important thing here. Thirdly, we think that the government has a track record of success. I've already mentioned things like internet or GPS, and this is because a lot of the time, like not only does government have competent people, the government like draws in people who are service oriented. That's why they don't go to the corporate sector, they go to the government sector because they are technically skilled, but they want to help people, which is why you see technologies developed by the government, like internet or GPS, more mass distributed to people at a quicker rate than corporations are able to do it, right? The examples that they gave, like insulin or airlines, are ridiculous because airlines have screwed everyone over during this crisis. After getting government bailouts because of COVID, they fired all their people. Insulin's an even worse example because corporations develop it. It is hundreds of dollars, and we still have people dying from diabetes because they can't afford their insulin because airlines drive up the costs, right? So in terms of R&D, we steal all their benefits, but we think the government is a better actor to do it because they can do it equally well. They're more incentivized to do it for the people, right? But like even in a worst case where like the government's worse at doing R&D, like that's just a value neutral thing. And I actually think it's a value positive thing because it's better for lower income workers to have a longer drawn out period where we can upskill them at a faster rate, right? And the government can provide these programs, and the government's the only one incentivized to provide these programs because of my second reason why the government's a good actor. It's just more accountable, right? The government is more accountable to the people, so it's likely to roll out AI more slowly and a smoother way for lower income people. First of all, it's accountable to the people. So if it's not doing so, the people will hold it accountable, whether through voting or all the media coverage and scandal that'll ruin these politicians' careers. Secondly, we think like it's in the politicians' self-interest to help lower income people because that's their constituents. Whereas corporations don't give a fuck about lower income people, politicians are motivated to get their votes and want to make sure that they have jobs, that they're happy, and they're not being screwed over by the status quo. Lastly, we think that government is more concerned with its image when it comes to like how service oriented it is, whereas corporations are expected to be profit motivated, which means that when corporations act in pernicious profit motivated ways, nobody cares because that's like what we expect them to do. So we think that the government's a better actor to do this because it's more accountable to the people. It can have more democratic processes, and we think that there are certain mechanisms there that means that the government is likely to do it in a way that is better for lower income people. I'll take a POI from closing if they have one. Okay, I'll take from Mo then.
Look, if you are going to still develop AI technology and you concede the great little benefits in the later on of such as the boost the economy, greater production, why does it matter to you if jobs are lost? Because even in your world, besides a vague description of having a transition phase, you have no idea how governments are actually going to stop AI technology from losing jobs. What are you going to do? Create the best AI in the world and store it in a storage room, OG?
I've already given you all the reasons why, right? Like corporations are likely to do it fast, not giving the government warning because there's no profit incentive or political incentive for them to be able to do so, which means people will be able to screwed over in the long term. So even if in the longer term we do see an overall transition, we think that we win on the short term when governments screw over corporations. But we also think that like in the short term or the long term, it's better for governments to have ownership because they just can't effectively regulate corporations in the status quo, right? We look at like tax havens, for example, Amazon paying literally $0 in income tax, right? We think that even in times of crisis, it's difficult to get them to do things. We look at Facebook with like Russia interference and national security concerns. Even with a national security concern, the government can't get corporations to do what it needs to do to protect the interests of the country and protect the interests of the people. So we think because status quo regulation just like isn't effective and governments aren't able to do this, we think in the short term we win because governments will roll this out more slowly. They're more incentivized to provide jobs programs. They're more incentivized to make sure that workers have other options. But we also think in the long term, when everyone is at threat of this, governments are also a better actor to do this because they care more about the people. They're more accountable to the people, and they don't suffer from the same profit incentives that corporations do. We are so proud to propose.
I'd like to thank DPM for that speech and welcome Diolo. Here.
Honorable Chair This debate cannot focus on the loss of current jobs on production, individuals on production lines of cars, because on both sides of the house, with the rollout of AI technology, you are still going to lose those jobs anyway. Which means this debate is about creating a smoother transition phase, and the transition phase is contingent on your country's economy. When your country has sufficient funds to fund UBI, when your country has sufficient funds to change the education system, and sufficient funds to create better welfare programs, we think specifically for John's analysis as to why R&D is resource intensive, opening government does not get those funds on their side of the house. This is the case line that they gave us from government bench, right? They are telling us that beyond this vague claim of how they're able to roll it out more slowly, we have no actual analysis on how it actually stop the loss of jobs for individuals working on production lines at all. Government cannot focus this debate upon the loss of jobs unless they want to defend not developing AI as a whole and crippling AI as a resource-based, as an economic engine of the nation. On their side of the house, they must take one and choose. Because if they develop AI and it generates and they concede to all the massive economic outcomes that they are going to get, they are going to have to roll it out anyway. They can't store it in a storage room and let workers be. Honorable Chair, John told you in Nelson how there's always been transition phases from the agricultural industry to serve to like literally production-based industries like factories, how individuals were able to move towards that, how farmers became workers in factories. We think individuals with lower education, here's why they misrep us, are going to be individuals servicing AI machines, or at the very least, even for the worst case scenario of individuals, governments have simply a higher and stronger economy to generate things like welfare programs and UBI for the lowest income individuals. On the other side, when governments are unable to do this and they have to focus resources on pumping it into AI development, they are unlikely the amount of resources on a scale to give to individuals on the ground. First, let's take out opening government's responses towards it. They say that the free market doesn't allow for as good of a production rate or as good of like development for its technology, and their example was NASA. I'm sorry, panel, but what NASA did in centuries and decades took SpaceX merely years to do. NASA currently looks to SpaceX for interstellar explorations. We think that because Elon Musk was able to generate a lot of corporate incentives and build an entire corporate structure around developing for the long term, around focusing on long-term economic outcomes, that's the world in which they are able to actually develop it better. The only reason why NASA is a government-based corporation is literally because governments claim space technology from the very start. Obviously, they came from the start, they're going to have to be able to claim the benefits. But at the point which privatization came in, they simply outran the government's case due to the more sources of funding, the ability to focus resources upon this one area. All of John's analysis as to why governments have no incentive to R&D was literally unresponded to. I don't know why when you have a switching of parties, a particular party wants to focus on a long-term benefit when that long-term benefit isn't going to benefit his own party in the next re-election. Those are structural levels of analysis in which Jay needed to answer on the other side of the house. Before I move on, I'll take closing.
Taken.
Wouldn't a transition phase be far easier when the government is able to withhold a technology while they transition workers? Isn't it far harder to transition workers when suddenly a car manufacturer just produces self-driving cars and within 2 years everyone loses jobs?
Our model was clear, panel. And here's I'm just going to re-clarify our model in this house. What do we support on our side? We support having maybe subsidies in the development phases of these operations, but most importantly, we support a taxation on the outcomes of these things. We think if you have the property and if you have the political will to literally nationalize the entire industry, you have the political will to tax, to an extent, also regulate these corporations. We are not going to be the side that defends jobs in the production line, because on both sides of the house, those jobs are going to die off in 10 years. No, panel, if the government and country doesn't want to develop AI, another country will do so. The competition is intense. If you roll it out slowly, you're not going to be able to maximize the benefits. This is why 5G technology is something America and China literally competes on, because the first country to roll it out gets to claim a vast majority of its benefits, and that's why speed of rolling it out is actually an important and crucial factor in this debate. It dictates how smooth your country will develop into an economy that's strong and powerful. This is why America got to claim to be a first world country, because post-World War II, they were the ones that let through things like industrial revolutions and immediate technological advancements that allowed them to claim the global economical stronghold. They need to respond to those things on side government. On to response on why states are actually really horrible actors. Opposition claims governments have a lot of money to spend. This isn't about the pool of resources you have, it's about the amount you distribute towards things. We told you things that how they are literally politically motivated, right? They have to fulfill, most importantly, their political mandate, which is pumping things more importantly into military, which right-wing Republicans actually care about, to welfare programs, which they want to give to the individuals who voted for them. We hear no political incentive or motivation as to why they are likely to channel a large amount of resources into technology developments onto AI technology, specifically since they said their workers don't actually want it on their side of the house. Second, they say governments actually get a large kickback from these investments, and we think that large kickback is something governments actually see. You are voting to get, you are literally your incentives to get re-elected. If your kickback comes in 10 years and to another party gets to claim that kickback when it actually happens, we don't think you're going to prioritize that at all. Number 3, government claims states are accountable to the people. This is just untrue. A lot of states don't have welfare programs. A lot of states don't really care about individuals on the ground. But I think most importantly, the ability for it to give things like welfare is about being able to have a pool of resources that's sufficient to generate into these things anyway. Only when you have a developed AI technology is able to literally run the benefits John told you about. I have an economy with a mass scale of production, which on 2 levels actually benefits people on the ground anyway, i.e. things like having a lower cost of production means a lower cost of purchasing goods, which directly benefits people on the ground. But also larger taxation, because it's simply a larger corporation that gives governments more kickbacks towards the GDP and economy, means governments gets to claim more money from you and overall has a larger pool of resources anyway. Number 2, on private actors. Government claims they are profit incentivized. We literally think this is why they are the best actors to claim the benefits of AI. For the very reason why they're profit incentivized, which means they care about things like competition. They want to outpace other competitors, which means they're likely to invest into individuals who are of higher education to develop AI. And don't let government strap this. If you have a large amount of education in the status quo, you're going to be individuals behind pioneering technology and not the individuals behind like maintaining and servicing these kinds of technology. We think the very same transition phases apply for both individuals. Don't let government strap this, that they specifically deal with this nuance on their side of the house. And talk about examples like United Airlines, like McDonald's. I think these are still harms which you are going to accrue at the point in which you literally consider you still want to roll out these benefits on your side of the house. Thereby it comes to weighing down of the scale of benefit you get when you roll it out late versus opposition which rolls it out early. We say the competitors on our side of the house, when you roll out early, you become a market dominant force in the global economy. You get greater trade transactions and literally a strong economy to generate back to welfare programs, and you buy literally things which Andrew Yang predicted. On your side of the house, if you are slow, if you're outpaced and you no longer become the pioneer of those forms of technology, even if you roll it out, you're not going to generate as much kickback as possible, which means your slow transition leads to nothing. You might give people some jobs in the short term on your side of the house, but in the long term, they lose all jobs as a whole. We don't have enough money to develop the economy, we don't have enough money to develop an education program, and not enough to funnel into welfare. If you side with the people on the ground, you side with opening opposition.
I'd like to thank DLO for that speech, and to start the closing half, government member here.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you good, Swains.
Here.
Start. Closing government is going to start their contribution to the debate with some pieces of framing. 3 things specifically. The first thing is we're going to be the first team to note that the technologies that we're talking about in this debate are unnecessary. They're unnecessary due to the terms of the topic. That is to say, we're only talking about technology which specifically replaces human capital, meaning that humans can, maybe in a more inefficient manner, already perform these jobs. That massively minimizes a lot of the benefits that opposition bench is able to claim, because only you get efficiency and maybe some economic benefit, even though that's just a facade for the mass unemployment that they themselves concede they will get. It is not as if this technology is going to change the world in a meaningful way. The second piece of framing that it's important to note is this technology isn't necessarily inevitable. Maybe it is under the opposition bench, but specifically when the government has access to this technology and produces this technology, if a government decides or is able to see that that technology will be particularly devastating to the workforce, they can obviously withhold it from being disseminated, which means that that technology is not necessarily inevitable. But the third thing to note, and this is why opening opposition undoubtedly actually come forth in this debate, is that if this technology is inevitable, then we can just claim all the economic benefits that they try to spin on their side of the house. It is not something that is unique to their team in this circumstance. That means in this debate, you have to make a trade-off when adjudicating it. That is the efficiency and convenience that you might get under side opposition. And note that that efficiency and convenience only exists for maybe a 5-year period that the private sector would have produced this technology a bit faster at the cost of the economic destruction of places which we've already seen take hold in places in the United States, such as Michigan. But it also comes at the cost of a series of ancillary harms, such as privacy and the rise of self-learning, artificial intelligence, those were things that were particularly devastating that we ought to care about. I'm going to talk about 4 things. Firstly, the transition phase in direct response to opening opposition. Secondly, the inevitability of this tech. Thirdly, why this dissuades non-sanctioned development of AI. And fourthly, if I have time, a principled push. Firstly, on this transition phase, note that opening opposition's material is entirely contingent on the fact, well, economies need to transition and grow GDP. 3 responses to this. The first thing to note is self-driving cars are fucking great for your GDP, but they're awful for actual workers because it puts them out of jobs. And when eventually OO just give up on this and say, well, who cares if a few workers lose their jobs? The reason that we care that workers lose their jobs is that we can look at the empirical history of things like that happening. We can look at robot arms that have specifically gone into places like Michigan. We care about workers losing their jobs because the rate of suicide in Michigan has gone up 100 implemented. Moreover, the opioid epidemic was able to primarily take place at the point where people were no longer able to make gainful employment because they lost their job, because they were displaced by things like artificial intelligence that were going to be, and that was a harbinger of things to come that was particularly devastating. That's why we ought to care about workers, and that's why GDP was often a misleading figure. We ought to care more about the unemployment rates, which seem to be going up, as well as the well-being of workers. The second thing to note is, although opposition's case is predicated on the fact, well, economies need to transition, but note a transition is so much easier when the government sanctions it or the government times their transition. The issue with the status quo is that a car company is able to develop a self-driving car technology, release it, and then within 2 years, the 3.5 million truck drivers in America are out of a job. That is something that was devastating. When the government uniquely had access to that technology, though, and uniquely developed their artificial intelligence, they could say, well, we have this technology, but we're not going to release it until enough people pull out of that workforce, until we've transitioned our workforce. Specifically then, the government is able to release that at a time that is particularly convenient. And this is why there's stuff about the profit incentives of companies, no thank you, is so particularly devastating, because they just say, well, that means these companies are going to rush this technology out and make sure it's particularly good because they want it to be upkept by many people. Many people want to buy it. But only the government would have the long-term strategy to ensure that they only released it at a point where it wouldn't be so economically devastating for people. That was the second reason as to why the transition was better under our side. But the third thing to note is they at first try to defend the fact that workers will not lose jobs. And they just kind of like muffle through this. They go, oh, well, you know, you still need to employ workers because you still have technology. No, obviously, and it was empirically true that at the point where you have technology that replaces workers, you no longer need those workers. So people's wages go down actively. It was better if the government was able to either block that technology, which they had the capacity to do, or to only time it to come out at a point where enough people have already pulled out of those industries such that they could effectively transition. That's why the transition, no thank you, was better under our side. Secondly, on the inevitability of this technology, I think it's important to note that this technology is not inevitable under our side, because obviously if it's going to be particularly devastating or something that is harmful, the government can stop it from being released in the first place. The second thing to note here is in response to their stuff about research and development, when they say, well, you don't get any more of this. This is fucking awful content for 4 reasons. The first thing is to say that governments already have arms races about research and development, so that continues. But the second thing is it's contingent on that research being good. I think research like NASA does and CSIRO and whatever does is probably good, but research specifically into how to displace millions of workers is probably kind of shit research, so it's fine if we don't get it. The third thing to say is, if you claim by your own analysis this technology is inevitable, then obviously we still get that research. And the fourth thing to say is eventually one of their mechanisms is, well, you have competition from other countries, meaning that obviously that research still happens. That is something that fell out of the debate and actively fell to our side. Third thing I want to talk about is how this dissuades harm, or the risk of harm is in this debate, which means that even if it is speculative, it is something we ought to care about. 2 things to say here. The first is, 3 things actually. The first thing to say is mass data collection has been made through this AI, because at the point where private companies are able to develop it, they're able to slip things in such that they're able to take users' data away. That was something that was harmful. I'll take a point now.
Taken.
This debate isn't about your country being the only nation that's developing AI technology. It's about a competition for who better develops it for their own country's economy. If you do it slowly, the framing we specifically gave you was that countries like China are going to roll it out and claim the benefits
Yeah, but China doesn't have the capacity to replace truck drivers in America. China doesn't have the capacity to replace call center workers or those who work in retail specifically. Maybe in terms of manufacturing goods, obviously the exports that China is able to make would displace those jobs. But note that that is a truism on both sides because it's already happened. We're specifically talking about, by your own characterization, those service-based industries, which obviously you're not able to export. That's why that falls out of the debate, and that's why you come forth. Why this dissuades non-sanctioned development of AI. The second thing to say is this precludes self-learning technology, which obviously poses an existential threat to humanity as we know it. And that is to say things like developing an AI to remember people's orders, to identify their faces, as you would need to do in service industries, often have ancillary harms that could mean that that technology eventually takes on a mind of its own. Note that this harm is a low-risk one, but a massively devastating one if it were to eventuate, and that's why you ought to care about it. But the third thing to note as to why this dissuades non-sanctioned development of AI is just companies often don't share their research with other companies because they have a profit incentive to do such, meaning that obviously that research is unlikely to be collectivized in such a way that it could be beneficial, but also companies have the capacity to uniquely hide that which they do. Because we give you the most important pieces of framing in this debate, because we make that transition phase so much better, it is clear that closing government has the most important contributions in this debate. Thank you.
Like
May I
to thank
begin?
the Gov member for that speech. And welcome, Op member. Here. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
Start.
Until this point, every speaker has merely touched upon the economics of this debate. So we're going to be the first time who introduces the political aspect of this debate. And we're going to be the first team that prove to you how there will be exclusive harms that arise due to nationalization of such technology. And we're going to be the first team proving the mechanism to how the alternative model in our side will work, which is fair taxation of such AI companies. We're going to mechanize that also. So before moving on, let's respond to 2 points that has been risen in today's debate. Firstly, who helps lower income people better, and secondly, which was a deadlock between the both teams, who is better at R&D, the private or the public sector. So let's firstly respond to the point of government claiming that they help lower income people better. We're going to refute this in various levels. So firstly, they tried to claim that people would be unemployed under our world, and then they would perfectly time their transition based on the government under their world. We think that this is simply too utopian, and they never explain how this will happen. So, and also most importantly, where will the funds come from if they're saying that they're going to withhold that AI technology and not monetize it? We see that a much better alternative is to just tax those AI companies which are burgeoning. We see that this is literally a goose laying a golden egg, and before that goose grows, they're just killing them at the chicken stage. We see that chick stage. We see that if this grows in a bigger industry, it means that the government could tax these companies more. We could allocate those funds in welfare, and this will be a continual source of government revenue compared to killing and withholding such technology from growing. And also another point of response is that when it comes to their points about how workers would be fired or whatnot, we see that this is a problem solution mismatch. The government could reinforce more rigorous worker protection laws. They could levy taxation or provide those workers with better welfare when it comes to legislating better welfare plans, when it comes to companies provided welfare. And we see that past waves of technology and past waves of innovation has also existed. The thing that they're failing to recognize is that when buses or automobiles were first invented, all of the horse carriage drivers also lost their jobs. When computers were invented, people thought that every job would be gone in today's world. We believe that jobs aren't replaced, but rather redefined when new technology arises. We see that the government never nationalized the auto industry because they were just scared with all those horse carriages being replaced by automobiles. They rather tax those industries and also rather help those industries grow because it's a new field that could be monetized and that could also create new jobs that we couldn't envision with our current minds. So we see that we're the actual ones that could help the lower income individuals better because we have the funds that come from taxing those companies, and this could be better allocated, which is an exclusive benefit under our model. And the second deadlock about the R&D, we say that we are the one that resolved this because we say that R&D matters when we only consider the incentives of both the private and the public market. So the companies and the government. So we say that R&D that happens within the free market is it's tailored to meet the consumer's needs. They fill in the consumer's niche because that's profitable and that's more convenient for the consumers. But now the government has no incentive to do so to attract consumers because it's a literal monopoly because they own all technology. And we believe that it's likely that since government, as they have also conceded because they want more votes, is a politically motivated entity, which means that it's likely for them to collect, analyze metadata, create military AI to be utilized during war, or utilize that technology for like electioneering or whatnot. We say that that's far more likely to happen under a world which all AI technology is owned by a single entity, and it's likely that those information will be kept very confidential without any checks and balances. So having that clarified, let's move on to our unique extension. But before moving on, yes.
Taken.
As analysed by your own opening, we still get the technologies that are good, like cars, because they're inevitable. Wouldn't it be better, though, if people knew that they had a 10-year time to transition their career, as opposed to those cars or technology just being released suddenly and displacing those workers?
We don't really get how in a matter of like that time span you have said how you're going to retrain all those like truck drivers into computer scientists. We believe that jobs will be redefined and replaced, and we believe it's rather better to make this transition happen, and also government acting in retrospect and providing the welfare and providing the retraining needed. We believe that we're the ones that are exclusively better in the end of the day because we get the funds out of those private markets, which will grow more compared to a monopoly which has stunted competition or whatnot. So let's lay out the benefits of the free market. Firstly, there's a check and balance because there's a relatively new field. There are a lot of competing corporations. It's literally a blue ocean. Secondly, it's much more transparent because it's open transaction. You need to reveal and disclose important information about AI during the shareholder meetings, and there are like a group of computer scientists in the private market that share these information. And thirdly, there's an optimization of service, which means that it fills up the areas with the highest demand and the most and the areas most needed by the consumers. And mind you, we believe that the government has no incentive to do so whatsoever because all the technology is in their hands. They have no reason to monetize this. They have no reason to compete with other companies to fine tune their technology. So we say that under their world, it's likely that abuse is going to happen because we see that when it comes to government, it's a politically motivated entity which is likely to utilize this technology for their political expediency. The reason why in the status quo, why private companies like Facebook and Google deny government contracts in the first place is because out of the fear that their technology might be militarized and politicized and cannot be used by consumers. So we see that the very nature of AI in itself is very apt in utilizing and being analyzing metadata for pattern analysis. This means that it's very likely to be utilized in politics, electioneering, or hacking foreign governments. We say that when it comes to all development and all usage completely owned by the government, which means that they are the only ones possessing confidential knowledge, this means that this is rather a dystopian society without any transparency, without any check and balance, because the government is the sole entity that owns this. So firstly, when it comes to contexts like authoritarian regimes like China or Saudi Arabia, which already has a corrupt and oppressive government that holds disproportionate power, this means that we believe that currently the only reason why such technology is not abused to a drastic extent because it's still seen as a realm of the free and private market, and companies find other better fields to invest for profit compared to surveillance technology, compared to other types of technology that could be politically utilized. But we see that when government use this, we feel that AI in itself is a technology with a lot of potential, and it could be abused when the government, a politically motivated entity, is the only one holding it. And we believe that the use of AI surveillance is growing around, even in liberal states. In the US, we see a lot of partisan gerrymandering and disenfranchising people of color. We believe that this could be more insidiously done when government holds AIs in their hands and they have the disastrous possibility to utilize for their own good. So due to these reasons, we're extremely happy to oppose.
I'd like to thank our member for that speech and welcome Government Whip here.
Hi, can everyone hear?
Yep.
Here. Start.
Closing Government is the only team in this debate that clearly articulates that AI is not always good, that research and development is not always good, that innovation for innovation's sake is not always good, and that sometimes it would be good to block technology if it would have drastically bad effects on people's life. What I'm going to do in this speech is firstly address closing opposition's extension by talking about whether the government has the political right to do this. Then I'll talk about the macroeconomy, and then I'll focus on jobs. So On whether the government has the sort of like political right to do this, basically what the government bench does, specifically at CG in this debate, is provide you a number of egregious harms that occur when AI is developed in the private sector. That was obviously the jobs material that occurred for all of the government bench, but we gave you a couple of additional and very harmful impacts that this would be likely to have. That was, for instance, the emboldening of mass data collection by corporations like Facebook and Google, which was used to enhance corporate surveillance. And it was secondly, the development of non-sanctioned self-learning AI, which was incredibly dangerous and which could lead to pretty significant harms in the future if it was to, for instance, get out of control. And we told you that principally the government was able to intervene in the economy in a similar way to the way that they intervene for things like safety standards to stop that kind of very harmful technology, which was clearly bad for society, which was not in and of itself good. What do we hear from the opposition bench? From opening opposition, actually just from the whole opposition bench, we heard that, first of all, well, maybe it would be a better way for the government to intervene if they just taxed private companies and just use that money for in good ways. I think obviously this is unresponsive to the non-economic risks that we give you, things about mass data collection, things about non-sanctioned self-learning. But additionally, this is just absurd in a context of where the largest companies routinely evade tax. It was bizarre to suggest that we would be able to successfully do this. We already do not manage to tax Facebook and Google, so it just seems deeply unviable. And if this is as profitable an industry as they want to tell us it is, that just gives those companies additional reasons to tax evade. I think that is insufficient logic in this debate. But also, obviously, these companies already make money. We can tax that. Well, maybe we can't tax that, but if we could tax that, we may as well tax that. Next, I think the better material comes from closing opposition, which is that the government has pretty bad political incentives to use this information. And they tell us that the free market is comparatively transparent. We give you two reasons at Sweeney why the free market is not comparatively transparent. That is firstly, that the free market is in competition, which does not make you want to release all your like trade patents. That obviously makes you want to hide the development you are doing and patent it and protect it so that other companies can't use it. That was completely unmechanized and clearly empirically wrong. But the second thing was to say the stuff that they told us about consumers being able to access this technology and somehow that making it transparent was absurd, because this artificial intelligence is pretty much all on the production side. This was replacing workers. No one actually notices that your car is now made by a robot arm. So it is ridiculous to suggest that consumers are holding those businesses accountable. Then we hear that well, politics will use this for things like gerrymandering and spying on their citizens. This is absurd. It is unclear why this is mutually exclusive. Obviously, hacking other countries already occurs. Obviously, gerrymandering already occurs. Obviously, China already surveils their citizens. Which is to say that authoritarian countries and bad actor governments obviously awash in this debate. So will happen on either side. It already does. But it is uniquely bad when Facebook is also able to do surveillance, as we tell you at member, which means that our side is uniquely better, because at least in liberal democracy, where you're not surveilling on your citizens en masse, we prevent Facebook from being able to mass accumulate data. And we never heard any response to that material. So we think we can conclude then that all of their ideas about the political sphere were clearly not mutually exclusive, but what we could do was prevent these companies from becoming awful conglomerates of information and data and so on. That was something that was uniquely beneficial at closing government. Moving on to how this will affect the macroeconomy, but first I'll take a point from opening.
Taken.
There's been a major case shift between your first and second speakers. First said you would transition slowly, but now you want to not roll it out at all. If you transition slowly, what is your political incentive when you're conceding it will lose jobs? Why would a government do this? But if you don't transition to it at all, how are you going to stop countries like China from exporting their self-driving cars into other nations and claiming benefits first, to the point which you're going to be a dead economy?
This is an absurd point of information, because clearly it can be the case that for some technologies you block them and for some you transition. So I think that's just irrelevant. I'll move on. I'll get to the export stuff later. So the first claim that we hear for opening opposition on the macroeconomy is that this is good because it means you get more things more cheaply. They tell us about insulin, which, as opening government pointed out, is a ridiculous example. But I think what is missed until member of the government is why this is particularly bad for things like creating cheap goods, which is to say that the companies that invent this stuff hoard their patents, stop other companies from using it, whereas the government is able to share this information in beneficial ways. Obviously, then I think it is the case that our side actually gets those benefits. Next, they tell us that research and development does not occur because it is reliant on political will and it is costly. Obviously, empirically, the exact opposite is true. But additionally, there are clear reasons why R&D is good for governments. There is a huge political will for inventing things, for being the first country to create a particular type of technology. But beyond that, we told you, the first team to tell you, that research and development was bad if it had bad effects. We told you why corporate R&D was bad. That was because it was aimed at cost saving. It was aimed at building market power, accumulating data, and so on. And those things were terrible, but the government did not have reasons to do that. Instead, they had political incentives to do things like save jobs, or for instance, to do things like develop medical technology. At the last minutes of the DLO speech, we hear about like offshoring and China exporting job replacements. We told you clearly that this was not mutually exclusive, but also obviously you just have economic control in other ways. You can stop those exports, you can put tariffs on them. That's so easy to mitigate. Then what we hear at CO is that you meet consumers' needs. Again, none of this meets consumers' needs. This is literally just about increasing profit. We think there have been a substantial number of examples to support that down the government bench. At the end of this macroeconomy point, what they miss is that companies are using this to control market power, to attract profit. Clearly, then you did not get the benefits that they told you they did. Finally, on jobs, I just want to note that closing government is the first team to fully impact what it means to lose your jobs, the kind of deaths from opioid overdose that meant, the kind of idleness, the loss of information. Obviously, it was the case that the government had unique incentives to protect those jobs. It wasn't good enough to say, well, people will get new jobs. Clearly, these technologies were about cost saving that led to mass job loss. We then are the only team that clearly characterizes these harms, as well as the additional harms we gave you about terrible AI and about data collection. Therefore, proud to affirm.
I'd like to thank Government Whip for that speech and to conclude the debate, Op Whip. Here.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Right.
Start!
Judge and panel, this debate shouldn't simply about, AI taking over versus people losing jobs. This debate is, in fact, a bit more multi-layered than that. This is not just your simple, this house should like tax robots and whatnot to try and mitigate the loss of jobs. We need to understand that this motion is describing the process of where we are offering the entire sector of AI and development in a silver platter to the government. That is the only, this point, or this element of the debate was only pointed out by my member, which hasn't been really responded adequately in this debate so far. Couple things I want to do in this speech. First, let's just do some response to the entire Gov bench and what they were talking about. And then finally, we need to ask ourselves the important questions of the government accountability within the closing half of this debate. First of all, we think that a huge central point of the government side was that essentially jobs are going to be displaced, and therefore we should not condone this. We had a multitude of responses that were ignored on the government side. First of all, we already told you that in the past, in the Industrial Revolution, or when the automobile industry started to boom, we didn't nationalize these things because we had safety nets to ensure that not every single person is going to literally starve on these streets, right? We already talked to you about how we can actively tax these kinds of companies. And they said, oh, well, actually, these companies would just bullet dodge the taxes. Well, then, obviously, if we can live in a world where government is going to have like lots of R&D and going to control the entire AI sector, we don't understand why this is necessarily infeasible on their side as well. And either way, we still think that the huge economic benefit we get from the AI, the huge economic benefit can be allocated to other programs like job training and education and whatnot. And they talk about the 10-year transition period, right? Which gives individuals like time to adjust. We think that this 10-year transition period is a huge economic loss that you are experiencing under your side of the house, which should actually better the economy and better the adequate standard of living for the individuals. Now, let's say everything I just said within the past 20 seconds is complete baloney, right? But we still think that even if that is not all true, we still think we have a better world which we live in, right? For example, and statistically speaking, richer countries have lower prices on things like necessities like food and water and shelter. Why is this the case? Because if you're a rich country, there's no need to price your necessities absolutely astronomical amounts. We think that overall, if your GDP rises, if you have a country that is oftentimes richer, even if people do lose their jobs and earn less income, we still think that doesn't really matter because goods are now going to be more cheaper on a world where we have lots of AI, where there's lots of economic stimulus happening in the country. Therefore, even if we admit that we lose on the fact that there's going to be jobs lost, we still think that the harm that they're talking about, how individuals are going to starve to death, won't happen at all on their side of the house. Second question we need to ask ourselves about this question of R&D. So first of all, we're not quite sure, still at this last point of this debate, as to how they have the upper hand on R&D. They essentially talked about, oh, look, the government has a humongous military budget. They have lots and lots of money. Therefore, we have R&D too. And they throw us some examples of, NASA and all the internet and whatnot. Okay, first of all, private corporations or things like shareholders wasn't very prevalent at those times, right? We already told you that on the upside, that we talked about companies like SpaceX. Yes, sure. SpaceX was the company that first invented things like reusable rockets, something that NASA, even if they were established and had full government funding, didn't manage to do at all on their side of the house. We think that overall, this is especially crucial because the field of AI is unique in the sense that it is research and innovation based, something that private corporations obviously have the upper hand on. Why is this further the case? Because we already told you, my member, that governments are going to change and have political agendas, right? In order to ensure that you have AI development, I'll take opening and after this argument. Our member told you about how governments have political agendas, meaning that there's going to be re-elections, meaning that if you have re-elections, you have changes in certain policies and areas of policy, which meaning that you cannot ensure that you have long-term investment if your government and your government is going to change on a periodic basis, as opposed to companies who can have a long-term business plan, attract shareholders and individuals who are willing to invest in this AI research field. Therefore, we think that obviously R&D is going to be much, much more better on our side of the house. Before I move on, I'll take
Taken.
What CG didn't say is that OO's example of China perfectly proves our side, where our government took control of tech companies to best manage those companies in the interest of lower income and people in China to whom they are beholden to. Whereas your taxation model doesn't allow governments to stop tech companies from releasing this technology next month and laying off millions of low income workers. It doesn't give the government any power to protect the lower income people.
Okay. So look, we're trying, if you can also juggle, let's say, R&D and also ensuring that individuals won't lose their job, we don't really see why we can't do the same on our side of the house. We think it's completely fair to do so. And the taxation model, even if it doesn't work, we already told you that even if all the stuff we have said before doesn't work, we already told you that as the general livelihood of the GDP of the economy grows, the prices of things, of necessities drop anyhow, so it doesn't matter anyhow on your side of the house. Finally, let's look into our final point about the government accountability, something that we uniquely member of the CO bench presented but was not really responded to adequately. They essentially said that these harms are not mutually exclusive. It can happen on either side of the house. But specifically, we already told you why that's not necessarily the case. On the government side of the house, there's essentially nothing, no checks and balances that can really stop this. We are living in an age where incidents like Edward Snowden and the Panama Papers have existed, where mass amounts of government surveillance and abuse of such technology has already happened. Then why do we think that this government is the best actor to facilitate AI? Notice that we are handing over all AI development and usage to the government. Even if the government says like, oh, we're just trying to make sure that people don't lose their jobs, this is very, very open to abuse. Well, why do we think that it's so much more better on our side of the house? We already told you, right? They said that, oh, even people in a free market don't really understand what the AI is made of. That is not what we're trying to say. The usage of the AI is going to be transparent in a free market because people have to understand what they're buying, like what usage of the product that they have is going to do before buying it. As to where the government, as long as they just tax the individuals to invest into the AI, no one can really understand what the usage is going to be. The government is an entity and not an individual that individuals can't just easily challenge. They have the power to abuse this, for example, marginalizing communities, and whatnot. Therefore, because of these reasons, very proud to oppose.
Cool. I'd like to thank Opweb for that speech. As I mentioned at the start